are probably the first person to come on my podcast to have this set of experiences that we can really dive into and talk through some of the differences between investment banking, what private equity is, what is growth equity, to decode finance.
Yes. You're going to be working late nights, whether you like it or not.
Like 2 a.m.?
It could be worse.
3 a.m.? 4 a.m.? Stop me when I'm close. Okay, for the record, is it finance or finance?
I personally say finance. I think in some circles, if you say finance, people will be like, who do you think you are?
Why do people at the GSB say finance? Like, professors say finance.
It sounds bougie. You just feel different.
Finance. Welcome to Cherie's Corner, a podcast where we dive into the topic of careers and hear from my friends and guests who are killing it in the business world, so we can learn from their lessons, their wisdoms, and their mistakes. I'm your host, Cherie, and I'm currently a business school student at Stanford University. Previously, I had experience working in tech and venture capital. In this episode, I speak with my Stanford classmate, Jennifer Huang. She's an absolute boss in the professional finance world, and she gives the download for recruiting for and working in investment banking, private equity, and hedge funds. There is so much to learn from her. When Jen was an undergrad, she realized that finance recruiting was a black box. She developed and taught an accredited class at UC Berkeley that prepares students for this process, and the class is still taught today, more than 8 years later. Jen also balances warmth, kindness, and silliness, which is why she's one of my closest and best friends that I've met here at Stanford Business School. I am so excited for you to join our conversation. Let's dive in. Welcome, Jen, to Cherie's Corner. You are one of my closest friends here at the GSB and also one of my roommates, so welcome to my room.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I do live down the hall, so.
Have you ever seen my room this way before?
I haven't seen it from this angle with a ring light and a camera in my face, but I like it. I like the view.
I like the view.
I like the view.
Okay, well, so guests who come on my podcast have the option to start off asking me any questions, hardball, softball, ask away, and I will preface saying that I have not seen these questions before.
Are you ready?
I am. I'm a little bit nervous.
First, we're at the start of a new year. What is a goal that you're actively working towards right now?
This is funny because Jen and I did a New Year's resolutions reflection thing a couple weeks back. I would say the thing that's top of mind for me is health and fitness. It's one of those things where usually I set goals and then I set a goal around it and then it kind of like fades away after a couple of weeks. So I think making sure that I'm going to workout classes, I'm super regimented about that, hot yoga 3 times a week, cardio at least once a week, just to make sure that I have that baked into my schedule. And I like working out because it's like a way to clear my mind and sweat out everything.
Love it. What is the biggest life or business lesson you've learned as a content creator?
The most valuable thing that you have as a content creator or an influencer is the trust of your audience. It takes up so much time, probably years, to build up the audience and to build trust and connection, but that can be broken in seconds or minutes if you're not careful of the brand partnerships that you're taking on or the type of views or content that you're representing on your platform. So I think trust is consistency over time, and your audience has learned to trust you, and you have to take that with a lot of weight. And it's a lot of care and thought has to go into it.
Yeah.
To be a responsible content creator.
I like that because content creation is something that many people fall into, but you're treating it very much like a business, which I really respect and admire. And so I thought that question was good just to see what golden nuggets you have for us.
I think, being intentional with content creation is something that I would urge all influencers or people who are creating content to do. Like, be intentional about the brands you're taking on. What does that mean for you? What does it say about the brand that you're building? It's, I think, pretty risky to take on like brand deals that are like haphazardly.
Yeah, and you are the business, so everything you do reflects YouTube.
It's true.
Last question. How have you changed through your business school experience so far?
I am someone who is very naturally conflict avoidant. I don't like jumping into negotiations or arguments or debates. That's just not really my style. In fact, I tend to shy away from that. And so I would say business school has taught me, the number one thing probably is just to be okay with tension and like be okay with feeling really uncomfortable and having uncomfortable conversations. It's not the end of the world. I've lived through every uncomfortable conversation that I've ever had. And I think business school has really, one, taught me that, and two, given me the tools and also the mindset, or like a mindset shift, so that I can be more equipped to have those conversations. So something that I learned is like running towards the fire is something that our professor says.
What is it about business school that's taught you that lesson or helped you evolve in that way?
There's just conflict all the time at business school, either like natural conflict that happens or manufactured conflict that happens, that like we'll have a class called like Conversations in Management where you'll literally read a case about like having to terminate an employee. So that's like a manufactured conflict. But I think in this environment, you have like so many different opinions that there will be conflict that arises, and there are ways to handle it in a like appropriate, decent and ethical way, which we're taught here at business school, more so than I think I was really taught at work beforehand.
Yeah, and in some ways, I guess it's like a safer space because when you're practicing these conversations in class, you know that, you know, you start and stop within like a 2-minute time frame and you can click back right into real life. Versus in real world, real job scenarios, you have to deal with repercussions, whether it's like making someone upset or navigating your personal like brand.
Totally. Yeah, in class we get to practice it with our classmates, and we try to create like a safe environment where you can be like, pause, let me take that back, and I can run through that again. Whereas in real life, like when you're firing someone,
you don't get to do it twice.
You don't get to do it twice. You don't get do-overs, and it's a conversation they're going to remember for a very long time, and so you want to be able to do it right.
And I think what's unique about business school is like I took a search fund class where we did practice a lot of those conversations. You get to practice delivering it, but you also get to hear how people feel and react and respond to the way you say it. And in real life, you just don't get to go under the covers and like understand what impact your words have as much. Yeah. In as direct of a way.
Yeah. We had a debrief after our Friday like class of Conversations in Management, and we're like, oh, so-and-so, when you said that, like we could see that you really cared about us, even though you were delivering bad news.
Yeah. Feels kind of touchy-feely.
Yeah. Honestly, more of the classes this quarter are about interpersonal relationships and conversations.
Yeah, those are the classes I found most valuable. Like last quarter, I took a lot more soft skill classes, like strategic communication, where we like practiced presenting and giving speeches, which I thought was really valuable. And this quarter, I'm taking a class called Paths to Power, where you can understand power dynamics and how to assert yourself in the right way in a corporate environment.
Awesome, Jen. Could you please tell the audience where you're from and how you grew up?
Sure. I'm originally from Plano, which is a suburb just outside of Dallas, Texas. And actually, one of the biggest influences in my life was helping my mom start her own test prep school back home in Plano. It was the first time that I got to see how dynamic running a business was, got to see like the ups and downs, and that's what really inspired me to study business in undergrad, which took me to UC Berkeley. And after college, I spent the first few years working as an investment banker focused on the consumer retail space, where we advise some of the biggest companies across beauty, food and beverage, and wine and spirits, which was really, really exciting as a fresh grad. After a few years, I moved over to the investing side, really to just get a little bit more alignment with the management teams and founders that we were working with. And I spent 3 years doing growth equity investing focused on high growth consumer companies.
Mm-hmm.
And then I came to the GSP.
I'm so excited to dive in here because I think you are probably the first person to come on my podcast to have this set of experiences that we can really dive into and talk through some of the differences between investment banking, what private equity is, what is growth equity. And I think we hear these words a lot, but just kind of parsing through, like, what is the definition and how are they different from each other would be super helpful.
Sure. I'm excited to be here to explore this with you.
To decode finance.
Yes.
You've had such a successful career starting in investment banking and then going to growth equity. Could you please explain in the most basic terms what the difference between IB, investment banking, private equity, and growth equity are?
Sure. So I'll start off with the investing side. Private equity is basically investing in any private company. So this is any company that doesn't trade publicly on the stock market. So actually, venture capital, growth equity, buyout, these are all forms of private equity that you can find. Investment banking, on the other hand, is kind of separate, all part of like the same ecosystem of supporting a company through its life cycle. But investment banking is really advising companies on critical milestones that they'll face in their life cycle. It might be a company that wants to raise capital through a fundraise, like a Series A, B, C, D. Or it could be a company navigating an exit process. So it might be a company that wants to sell to a strategic buyer or another private equity firm, or it could be a company that wants to go public. And so investment bankers really serve as advisors to walk them through how that all works and also manage that process so management teams can really focus on their day-to-day of running a business.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess to dive deeper into the private investing side, I would think about it more like in terms of how a company progresses through its life stages. So for example, if a company is first starting out, they need a little bit of money to get the business started and find product market fit. In that case, they'll raise venture capital funding. Once they've achieved product market fit but want to expand into specific products or services or geographies, that's when a growth equity firm can step in and really help them get to the next level, whether it's resources to get there, connections to the right people or advisors, or it could be helping the management team become a little bit more sophisticated, bringing in the right people. The buyout piece of this ecosystem is when a company has hit a stage where it's a lot more stable, might not be as high growth as a venture or growth stage company, but there are potential efficiencies that they can make, whether it's through cost cutting, changing out the management team, things like that, where a buyout firm will get interested and put on some debt on the company and help fix it up.
I like thinking about it in terms of stage of company and also potentially how much money they're raising or I guess trying to sell for at the very end. So like venture capital, it's like pre-seed, seed, Series A. And then where does growth equity hits on Series?
Growth equity is a little bit of a grayscale. So there's some firms that will define themselves as venture growth, where they might extend into like Series B, C. Others might be late stage growth or growth buyout, where you'll see elements of venture or private equity depending on what their angle is and what they see as opportunity in the growth investing space. So there's no clear definition, and it really takes a lot of time to talk to people who work at these firms to understand how they think about their investment mandate.
It's a bit confusing because I like how you laid it out because it's less confusing, but it's the terminology is confusing because the overall umbrella is private equity, which includes venture capital, growth equity, and then buyouts.
Yes.
But when I think about private equity or when people talk about private equity, they mainly focus on the buyout piece.
Yep.
Is that confusing or is that just me?
It is confusing, and I would say when I was navigating investing recruiting, it was also confusing because you don't really understand how a firm thinks about their investments until you talk to them. But at like the broadest sense, people do define the investing world as venture capital, private equity, and growth equity is kind of that flavor in between, and that's why there's so much of a grayscale.
I see. And for investment banking, which is a different bucket from private equity, is investment banking also primarily focused on private companies?
It's actually on both. So investment banking, you could advise companies at like the growth stage, for example, who want to exit, but also large public mega cap companies that need support thinking through, what companies are interesting for them to buy, what trends are interesting in the market that they should be aware of, and if they're looking to raise debt, for example, to fund new initiatives within their business, these are all things that an investment banker can help with. And so investment banking is very much an advisory role, similar to consulting, for example. And so the range of companies that they can support is really a broad spectrum.
I see. And I've heard people use the term like, I'm going into public investing. How would that be different from what we're talking about now?
Right. So private investing is what I described previously. So venture, growth, buyouts. Public investing is focusing purely on companies that trade on the public markets. So these are companies like Apple or Microsoft, where any individual investor can go out and buy a share in that company. It's a little bit different because private investing is very much focused on access. So sourcing is a really big part of private investing, where you have to go out, build relationships with these companies in order to even have the opportunity to invest in them. But public investing, any person can go and read the financial statements, public filings online, and decide for themselves, do I want to invest in this company or not? And that's what really influences stock prices, public markets, everything you see in the Wall Street Journal over time.
I've talked to some of my friends in finance who used to work in investment banking and then private equity. When they make the switch to public investing, what would that role be called? Is it like...
It's like working at a hedge fund, working at an asset manager, and there's also some family offices. So these are very wealthy families that want to invest their capital in the right way. Sometimes they'll also have public investing roles where you spend your days reading through filings and talking to the management team sometimes to really understand whether or not it makes sense to make that trade.
Interesting. So when they're going into public investing, it's like kind of like on a much larger scale, like me working with my Fidelity.
Yeah,
my Fidelity assistant.
Not, but at a larger scale.
Not with my savings.
With a much larger capital base.
I see.
But that's exactly right. Like, that's actually one of like the big appeals of public investing, is that it is pretty easy to go off and do that on your own. If you worked at like a hedge fund, for example, and understand the toolkit of how to evaluate a company, make the right investments, you could go off and do that on your own with a smaller capital base, but you have the skills to do that. Versus as a private investor, it's a lot harder to have the infrastructure to really support entrepreneurial endeavors like that. If you're on the venture side, you could become an angel investor, but the types of companies that you can get into will be much smaller scale. And if you want to be like a private equity investor on your own, I've usually seen that more in the form of a search fund, and in most cases, those people do need to raise a large amount of capital from investors and limited partners in order to make that happen.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that I'm a public investor.
You could be.
I am.
Are you?
Sort of. I dabble. Well, so you've also mentioned hedge funds. What is a hedge fund? What is a hedging a fund? And where does that fall?
Right. So when I look back, or if we go back to how I described the private investing space, a hedge fund will invest once the company has crossed over to the public market. So they've gone through an initial public offering or an IPO. So that's when hedge funds will usually start investing, whether it's when a company first goes public or they've been trading for a long time. But a hedge fund, similar to a private equity firm, it's a fund where they've raised capital from endowments or high net worth individuals, other investors, and they use that capital to invest in public companies. it's less of a relationship-oriented business as private investing is.
Yeah, I'm hearing like public versus private company is like a separation of like how to bucket these things, and also stage of the company where it's at is a way to bucket these things.
Yeah, for a company to go public, they have to have like a proven track record, be a lot more stable. There are high growth public companies, and there are cash burning companies as well on the public markets. But it is a bit of a different cadence of work just because you are more guided by like quarterly earnings when companies file things publicly, just because it affects all of the other individual investors that are trading on the public markets every day.
As you have experience looking at investment banking, private equity, and also hedge funds, what would be the traits or characteristics of someone who would go into any one of those fields, and what would differentiate someone?
Yeah, I would say to be a good investment banker and to be a good private equity person, you really do have to be very well-rounded. You have to have strong attention to detail. You have to be great at relationship building to win a deal. And you also have to be a good partner over time. If you're an investment banker, this is advising companies through some of the biggest milestones of their life cycles. As a private equity investor, whether it's early stage or late stage, you're really supporting a management team over a number of years, and you're in it with them because you're a co-owner. On the public investing side, I would say the traits to make someone successful are being really, really analytical, really creative with how they think about investing and how they develop an edge on the market, just because the public markets are so competitive with any person you know being able to buy a stock. And I think like having that rigor, analytical ability, and interest in tracking these companies over time and being a passive investor are kind of the big things I would think about for a public investor. You are investing in these companies in kind of a similar way, but you can jump in and out when you want to. So you can capitalize on specific events that might happen, for example, in the world or in news, and you don't have to be tied to a company for years because you can just sell your stock the next day and move on to the next thing, whatever generates the most alpha or return.
As you transitioned from your first 2 years in investment banking to growth equity, what were some of the variables that you considered?
I would say my recruitment process was a little chaotic. You typically will join an investment banking analyst program after your college years, and in the first few months of starting that job, you're already recruiting for private equity. It happens that fast. I started my investment banking job in July, and I got my next private equity job in November that same year.
And that's normal?
That's normal. So
why is that normal?
There is like a huge race for talent within private equity, and that timeline of recruiting fresh investment banking analysts has been getting pushed earlier and earlier, just because firms that are recruiting feel, oh, well, if I go earlier, I can capture like the best talent faster and lock them in for the next 2 or 3 years. So I would say my process, I did think through it. I was like, okay, like I personally am really interested in continuing to build my analytical capabilities. I want to be at a firm that, runs real analysis, builds real models. And so that really pushed me more towards late stage growth in private equity roles, which brought me to the firm that I was at. Looking back, I think I could have been more thoughtful about the different characteristics of each firm. I guess the difference between investment banking recruiting and private equity recruiting is that investment banks largely serve as the same function. They advise companies through big milestones, and you provide advice. That's what you offer. That's the service that you offer. On the private investing side, there's just so many different flavors of what firms can do and what their mandate is, whether it's, how do they think about investing in companies? Do they focus more on TAM, so total addressable market, how big the market size is, or is it helping the company expand into new products, geographies, verticals, or is it putting on debt and trying to cost cut or financially engineer a company to make your returns? On top of that, it's also how do they partner with these companies? Is it, switching out the management team immediately, Or is it working with the founders that currently sit in their place? I didn't think about all those factors. I still really loved my experience and learned a lot. And I'm actually continuing to still work in consumer growth investing after school. But there's like so many lenses to what a private equity firm does and whether or not it's a fit for your personality and how you want to invest.
Interesting. As an outsider looking in, it sounds quite strange to lock in your next job when you've started a job like a few months ago.
Yeah.
But that's just the way it works, it sounds like. Is that commonly known / commonly done, that there's a pipeline from like IB to PE within like 3 months?
Within finance, it is commonly known.
Yeah.
And that's actually why it's a big problem for diversity. So if you think about how someone becomes qualified to get a private equity role, you know, they have to go to the right college, recruit with the right investment banks to get the right summer internships, which translates to a full-time offer. And within the first few months, they have to know that this recruiting process is coming and start prepping for it, building the right connections and network in order to even get a look to interview with these private equity firms. It's a huge issue for diversity because some people, like myself, like I didn't come from a background where my family had connections in finance. They didn't have like corporate business roles where I could ask them like, oh, like, how does this work? How should I network? How should I prepare for behavioral or technical interviews? And so that's why there aren't many women in finance, and there's even fewer women in private equity, just given there's so many hurdles that happen before then.
I'm just curious as to what a private equity firm could be testing a new investment banking analyst on in their first three to 4 months on a job. It's like, have you even learned anything to qualify for the next thing?
Yeah, that's actually like a huge question that's debated constantly, because especially with COVID, with so many people working from home, not having like the same learning experience because they're not in office, rubbing shoulders with people every day, the talent can like vary a lot. In the first 3 months, like I did have to try and get on like as many active deals as I could as an investment banking analyst. I spent weekends and evenings practicing building models for the modeling test that these private equity firms would offer, and practicing like how I would respond to, you know, what firm you're looking for. It's hard because you don't really know the first 3 months out of college what you want.
Interesting. Do people just pretend that they know? Or like have a clear, like, I don't know. It's just like you're like learning for your you're like learning from the job that you just got. You're prepping for a new job and being like, this is what I want to do in the next 5 years. But it's hard to say when you're still like, I'm speaking from my experience. When I first started my new grad job, I was just like in the weeds of what I was trying to do, and the ramp up onboarding period for like product managers at a new big company, they say is like 6 months. So this sounds kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's hard to know exactly what you want when you're fresh out of college. And so I do think a lot of the experiences that you have as a college student can really influence where you end up. Like, for example, in college, I did some consumer research working for a professor to assess pay what you want pricing, understanding consumer psychology. And that's kind of an experience I pointed to in some of my interview processes to be like, hey, like I'm interested in consumer investing. You know, I had helped my mom start her test prep program when I was growing up, and I was like, hey, I like working with founders and management teams and understanding that growth process. And ultimately, like those small experiences and milestones in my life, they kind of accumulated into like what I thought would be interesting for me. You just kind of have to act on that like small glimpse of what you think you might want.
Sure.
Without fully being sure.
Sure. I like that. I mean, it also is just connecting the dots, looking backwards, you know, saying like, these are the things that sparked interest or excitement, passion in my life previously. Why did it have that effect? And how does it have an impact on what I want to do next?
Yeah.
Interesting. How did you think about working with a professor in college? Did you know that, was it just pure interest, or did you know that it would translate to an experience that would be helpful for your next job?
At the time, I was a freshman in college, still trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And so I actually heard about this research opportunity through a friend from my hometown who also went to Berkeley for undergrad. And it was more just like I wanted to just get involved with the school. It didn't come from like, oh, I really want to get consumer experience right now. It was more just like, hey, like I think this is a good opportunity to meet professors, get more involved in like the Berkeley campus. And it is like known as like a research institution. I didn't know what I was signing up for or like what it would amount to, but looking back, it was one of like the first consumer experiences I had.
Interesting. I worked in a research lab at Columbia my freshman year, and I didn't know what it would lead to either, because at that point I was like still interested in pre-med. I cleaned mouse cages every Friday morning. I would take the mice out, I would clean the cage, weigh the mice because the research was on brown tissue and its impact on obesity. So we did surgeries on the mice. I didn't. I was
cleaning the cages.
You'll
have to start from somewhere.
Right. Like the PhD students were doing this research,
Yeah.
the surgeries on the mice, and then they would recover. I would weigh them and give them food, whatever. But then that I could, because I kind of like emailed the PI of the lab a zillion times to try and get in, and eventually they said, yes, you can come clean the cages. It led to my next experience for my summer internship my sophomore year working at a neuroscience research lab at Mount Sinai.
Wow.
But then I could be like, oh, because I did this, I can do more research with mice. But like, you know, you kind of have to, do people say that, like, you have to eat the frog at some point?
I've never heard of that.
Really? I feel like people say that with investment banking or like really hard jobs early on to like set you up. So too many animals in the story.
Too many animals, mice, frogs.
So yeah, it was interesting because it was not fun work. It was interesting being in the lab, but I think it really helped me leapfrog to the next experience.
Like for example, like we went to talk earlier this week where we walked away feeling like, oh, like we're all basically a conglomeration of all like these minor experiences we've had, and they build up to the people we are today. Even though we're relatively young, we still have so much to talk about and share. And I think that also dovetails really well with like careers. Like these small experiences that we have, they're what we point to get to the next step. And when we reflect on it, it's like, what were we even thinking at the time? Like we weren't really thinking like 10 years in advance, but that's how careers happen, and that's how life happens.
How do you feel about the expression eat the frog, in the sense that when we come right out of school, the idea that we gotta grind, it has to be a really potentially tough 2 years to then set you up for the next step and the next step, and potentially a life that is like conventionally successful and more comfortable?
I've asked this question to myself a lot. When I was in college, I decided early on that I wanted to pursue a career in finance, and I knew that it was going to be hard. And so I really like put my head down. I was like, for my freshman summer internship, I actually interned at an investment bank in the Bay Area. But the way I got there was by cold emailing hundreds of firms, getting a ton of no's. And then when I moved on, like post-college, like I was working late nights. I wasn't able to like go out and have the life experiences that maybe a lot of people would have wanted, like moving to New York, living in a big city. And when I look back on that, it's like I worked really hard to get to where I am now, but I missed out on some of like the life experiences that make up like your youth. It is like a big question for me that I've been navigating at the GSP. It's like, what is that balance between working really hard, grinding for the future versus like living in the present and living life as a young person?
I don't know where I stand, because on one end it's like we've had the late nights like in college, like really putting my heads down and studying CS and eating the frog there to then like have the job in Silicon Valley that I had.
And that's how we got to the GSB.
Exactly.
Like, honestly, I think if we talk to anyone in our class, they probably all worked really, really hard and had to sacrifice something to get here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, do I regret working late nights if I'm here?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I do.
I don't think I do either.
Yeah.
What is the alternative?
I mean, the alternative is living your life, YOLO. You only live once. But I don't know where that would have taken me.
I think careers are very long, and I would say the people at the GSB are probably the top whatever percent in the world who might be like very financially secure for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
It's probably like a security thing.
That's true. But then the next question is, well, post GSB, we've all had the chance to like live our best lives, not really have responsibilities or be grinding and have that like high stress that we had before school. And it's like, how do we want to take our lives from here?
Mm-hmm.
Do we want to go back to grinding? Is it worth it for the next X number of years to get to whatever that next milestone is? Or should we be present as we have been at school and carry that forward?
Third alternative, is there a way to marry the two? Like, can you be present while you're grinding?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I guess we have to see.
The next question is about salary and how people are paid in finance. Could you first go through just what the average structure looks like in terms of salary versus bonus versus any other sort of compensation?
And I'll talk about specifically private equity here. As a junior person, your compensation will mainly be all cash. It'll be a base salary, which you're paid in every paycheck, and then a bonus, which you typically get once a year at the end of your program year, so during the summer.
And when you say a junior analyst in private equity, how old generally are these people when they're following the traditional path out of college?
Right, so if you follow the typical path, so 2 years banking, you're in private equity for 2 or 3 years, you'll be probably 26, 27, and so your compensation will be, mainly cash, base, bonus. And then as you become more senior, that's when co-invest and carry come in. These are more like incentive-based or deal-based. So co-invest is basically allowing you to put your own capital to invest with the firm in whatever deals they're pursuing. So you get exposure to your personal portfolio in the deals that you're actually working on or that your firm actually does. And then carry is compensation where you're allocated a percent of the fund. So whatever profits the fund makes after making back the money that they've invested, you get a portion of those returns.
I see. And ballpark numbers for someone who's 26 or 27 in private equity, what does it look like for the base salary and the bonus?
It really depends on what the size of your firm is. For example, if you work at a fund that's less than $500 million in fund size versus $5 billion in fund size, the salary can really range. And it also depends on where you're located. A fund that's based in Philly, for example, has a very different cost of living for the employees versus New York City or San Francisco. I would say ballpark, all in base and bonus, a private equity associate could make $250 to $300K per year.
And as we move up to more VP, where it becomes, I know there's many more variables now with carry, and it depends on the companies that you invest in, but what does that look like? And how old are VPs generally?
So VPs will probably range, it could be 28, 29, so people who are just coming out of business school, or older, depending on how the firm sets up their program, how many years it takes to make VP within that said firm. Carry and co-invest are very hard to quantify and vary so much across firms, but from a cash compensation perspective, VPs can make, $450 to $500K a year.
And is it just from analyst to VP, or is there an in-between role?
There's analyst, associate, sometimes senior associate, vice president, principal, managing director. And there might be some firms that add different titles in between.
Interesting. In my pre-MBA internship in VC, principal is less than VC.
VP.
VP. So,
I
yeah.
see.
It would be, actually, I don't even remember what it was, but principal was below VP.
Yeah. It can
Or I guess
depend on,
partner.
like, whatever firm you're at. Like, the number of years of experience, what title you get. And actually, within VC, I found more and more firms just saying partner or general partner. So, like, anyone who joins is a partner, just because when you're out there in a very relationship-driven job, your focus is putting as many people out there as possible to build relationships and win deals. So they don't really want title to get in the way of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you're a founder and I'm an analyst reaching out to you, that probably elicits a different reaction versus, like, a partner.
Mm-hmm.
So some of, like, the naming conventions and titles really depend on how the firm invests and how they think about winning deals and structure.
Yeah, I think this is also kind of like a meme too in like the venture world where like everyone is a partner at some companies. It depends on how they set it up. But then when you go to their website, you're like, oh, you have 40 partners. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And then if you go to like smaller ones, obviously they use the terminology in a different way.
Right.
What is your favorite part about growth equity and investing in consumer?
I love the growth equity stage. I've done a little bit of exploration in business school across hedge funds, venture, and I think growth equity is just my sweet spot. Personally, I like that these companies have already achieved product market fit. They've developed a product or a service or a brand that customers love, and you can tell that the founders are just so passionate about what they've built but need that extra boost and support to get to the next level. And so I love working with these founders and helping them think about, like, what is the best strategy to expand into a new product, expand into a new geography. How do they think about hiring people and who the right people are to put in place on their team? And so I just like being at that stage where it's like, things are working, but what can we do to supercharge the growth and get these founders and teams to a place where they might not have been able to get to without that incremental capital or incremental advice and support. And then specifically for consumer, I just love how tangible the products and services are. I like walking around a street and pointing to different retailers or brands and being like, oh, I know the founder of these brands. Being able to like use these products and having my own point of view and opinion as a consumer is so exciting. And I also love how complex consumer psychology can be. Like thinking back to my college days as like a researcher in consumer psychology, it's just interesting to think about that meld between like quantitative and qualitative aspects of what a brand is and why people love it.
What are some of your favorite brands?
Well, I love my Dyson Airwrap.
Sponsor us, Dyson.
Please sponsor us.
Literally, Dyson sponsor us. We use it every single day.
Yeah.
Actually, funny story. Mm-hmm. We were both using our Airwraps at the same time a couple nights ago, and we blew a fuse. And then the next step was us trying to figure out where our electric box was.
So we could keep doing our hair.
So that we could flip it on and off. And it was actually outside of our house. So that was interesting to find that.
Yeah. In my prior job, I actually spent a lot of time investing in beauty and personal care, as well as services and franchise brands, which I thought were also really exciting. I love using beauty products, and especially in like the franchise retail services space. These are brands and companies that I interact with, and I personally use the services.
What are some of the traits of the people that you admire in finance? And what are some traits that people should have or should develop to succeed in the finance world?
I would say attention to detail is really important. It's like really driven into you as an investment banking analyst to like check every footnote, make sure everything's aligned. And I think that like rigor is really important in approaching like any like deal negotiation and any investment diligence process, for example. So attention to detail. I think having a strong interest in building relationships is really important. Whether you decide to build a career as an investment banker, a private equity person, you need to have a strong network, because eventually your job is to source deals, build relationships with these companies, and that's what your career is made of. And then third, I would say, I think having a lot of grit and perseverance is important. You're going to be working late nights, whether you like it or not.
Like 2 a.m.?
It could be worse.
3 a.m.? 4 a.m.? Stop me when I'm close.
It can get bad.
5 a.m.?
It really depends on like what deals you're working on.
Yeah.
Because as an investment banker, it's a client services business. So if your client wants it the next morning, you need to put in as many hours as it takes to get it done. And as like a private equity person, like you're a co-owner in a business. So if something goes wrong, you are responsible for fixing it. So there is a lot of pressure, and you do have to put in late nights if that's what it takes to get something done.
Yeah. Early mornings, it sounds like.
Like,
where is the line?
There was a time where I was a summer intern, and I was at the office until 6 a.m. I come out of the office. I was working at like a big investment bank. I come out of the office, and all of the sales and trading people who trade the public markets, were coming in for work.
Yeah. That's crazy.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I also wanted to ask you, okay, for the record, is it finance or finance?
I personally say finance. I think in some circles, if you say finance, people will be like, who do you think you are?
Why do people at the GSB say finance? Like, professors say finance.
It sounds bougie.
Is that really the answer?
Say finance. You just feel different.
Finance.
Yeah, well, I don't say that.
I think some of our older professors say finance.
I personally think saying finance just does the trick. You don't have to make it that fancy, to be honest.
Yeah, you don't have to make it crazy.
Yeah.
Also, thank you for sharing that story about having a late night. I've also heard of the concept of protected weekends. What does that mean, and where does it come from?
Yeah, so protected weekends exist a lot in the investment banking world, particularly for junior analysts. A few years ago, there were instances where junior investment bankers were working late nights, where some analysts have passed away because of the long hours that they've worked. And so over the past few years, investment banks have put a lot more emphasis on having some semblance of protection over junior analyst schedules to continue to attract and retain talent. So a lot of investment banks do institute a protected weekend policy where, starting Friday, 7 p.m. to Sunday noon, you cannot work. And if there is an active deal that you have to do work on, you have to get approval from senior members within your company, not just your team, but within your company, in order to work in that time. I think it's actually like really, really important to have that, because there's so much go pressure in investment banking that you do need those structures and guardrails in place to really protect people's well-being.
And that's because most weekends outside of the protected weekends are not protected, and IB analysts / people working in that field are expected to work almost every other weekend.
So it depends on the bank. Some banks do have like a blanket protected weekend policy in general.
Like all weekends?
Some banks do. Other banks might be like, okay, one weekend of the month, you have a protected weekend. But you're still working long hours on the weekdays, and in some instances, because of the protected weekend policy, people will work even longer hours on the weekdays to make up for that lost time.
Yeah.
So it's like
it's a balance.
It's a balance.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's kind of like when I was working at LinkedIn, we had a day every month was called In Day, where you can use that time to explore something outside of work. Some people would have offsites with their teams, or like catch up on work or whatever. Like, you can choose to like basically kind of take that day off.
Yeah.
But then it would create more work for you, because then you have that Friday where you're not doing stuff, and it would just shove all the work into a shorter week.
Yeah, so there's pros and cons to it. Like, it's nice to have a little bit more control over your schedule and being like, okay, I can make plans with my friends this weekend. I can like run errands and get my life together.
Yeah.
But it comes at a cost sometimes as well.
One of my roommates early on in our careers, we worked in investment banking, and it was crazy to create plans and never know if she was going to show up or not.
Yeah.
And I, like, couldn't believe that was normal when I was 22. And we're like, hey, we're going to get dinner on this night. Like, can we? She's like, no, I'm working, which was fine. Or, like, we'd try to see a movie at, like, 9 p.m. on a Friday. And she's like, I'll try, but, like, don't know if I'll get out.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
That's exactly why when you were asking me about, you know, is it worth grinding versus, like, just living life? Like, you don't really have an option. If you are going into an investment banking job and knowing that you have to just be available 24/7. You're on call, basically.
Yeah.
And it takes a toll because you're not able to, like, have normal life experiences. If you're working all the time, on call all the time, like, you can't make plans to, like, invest in your friendships, or for some people it's, like, even, like, dating is a challenge because you can't schedule a date and really make sure you can show up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also know that, like, it's so stressful that, like, finding time to go work out, take care of yourself, have a meal, like, can be hard.
Yeah. That's why there's a lot of finance people at business school. It's like a nice break for some of them.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay. We're moving on to the last section of our podcast.
Okay.
This is more about, like, life topics. Jen, what have you learned about yourself in the last 5 years?
This actually fits in really well with some of the things we've talked about in this podcast, but I've learned that it is important to invest in yourself, whether it's spending time with friends, taking care of your, like, mental health, well-being. And early on, like, I didn't really think about that. I didn't really care about that. And it's a big learning I've had since coming to the GSB, how important it is to have, like, a well-rounded life, to find joy in just ordinary life things, and that success can be defined in a lot of different factors. Like, it's not just career success that makes up a life or will make someone happy. It's friendships and working out and spending time with people you love that make life worth living.
Yeah, I've had this conversation with some friends at business school where we were also go and very career driven before business school, and it's probably what got us into this amazing experience to begin with. But now at business school, where we can take a step back, take a breath, and really reflect on what we want next, I've talked to a couple of classmates of mine, both men and women, who are just like, the next step, like, we don't know coming out of school if we want to be as go, because we've seen kind of both sides that, like, this is what it's like to live a very balanced life at business school, and we like it. And I don't know.
How do you think about that question?
Is it at the expense of something else? I don't know if am I making sense?
Yeah, no.
What I'm doing after business school, I think, is quite unconventional, so I don't know if it's completely applicable.
Right, but as, like, a content creator, you could invest all of your time towards content creation too. I think in some ways, because you're working for yourself, you don't have any guardrails. Like, you don't have someone saying, take a protected weekend. You can't work this weekend.
Yeah.
Like, because there's no guardrails, I guess on the pro side, you can be more intentional about setting those, but on the con side, like, you could also just, like, completely immerse.
Yeah. I'll answer this in two ways. Like, one, as a content creator or someone who's starting my own thing, an entrepreneurial path, I really gotta love what I do, because I'm going to be spending so much time doing it. It has to be life-giving rather than life-draining. So I think really finding the right thing to really pour myself into, which is this podcast and other creative endeavors, like, I feel so strongly about that. And if I'm up until, like, 2 a.m., like, editing a video or creating content, I'm excited about that, rather than, like, if I can imagine myself back in the corporate world up until, like, 2 a.m. prepping for, like, slides for a presentation for, like, some company that, like, I don't feel this way about, that would be life draining. So I think it's really knowing what gives me energy and where I derive that energy from. The second thing I'll say, which I don't know if corporations have taken this view, but because I'm doing my own thing, I can. I know I am a better entrepreneur or a better contributor when my mental health is in check, when I've gone to that yoga class, when I'm eating right. If I like skip lunch to like while I'm editing something, like I can tell that my level of work or my efficiency has gone down.
Yeah.
Or if I'm just like super antsy at home because I haven't worked out today, or I've taken 700 steps according to my watch, like I'm a worse employee for myself because of that. So I'm able to recognize that in myself, and since I have complete control and discipline, I'm like, these are the things that I need to do before I start my workday or during my workday that I can implement to be a better employee of one.
Right. I love that.
Yeah.
And I guess you bring up an interesting point where you're like, I wouldn't do this unless if I was passionate about it. There's always people who are like, don't make your job your passion. Don't make your passion your job. What do you think of that? Having pursued your passion for the past few years.
Who says don't make your passion your job?
Because some people are saying if you make your passion your job, or if you make like your hobby your job, you won't love it as much anymore because it becomes work.
Yeah. Oh,
so
I see.
How did you think about that question, or how do you think about that question?
Yeah. Over the summer, I was able to test that hypothesis. Yeah, well, I mean, that was like a fear that I had. It's like, this is something that I've been doing part-time for the last 3 years, and I've been doing it on my own schedule, not putting any pressure to monetize on myself. What will happen when I'm doing it 24/7 and I'm all in gonna do this for the next foreseeable future? Would I like it? And because I was able to run that little experiment over the summer, I was just like, I really enjoy this. It gives me more energy, and it's something that I can take my passion and make it my job. And I've talked to people, and they're just like, you want to have a job where you wake up in the morning and you're excited to go to and do those things. I can tell you honestly that like before the GSB, I was working in like an amazing company with like an incredible mission and vision that I bought into, but then I can say like quite honestly towards the end of my tenure there, like it didn't have the same like zest or energy that it had started out with.
Yeah.
And it was hard like towards the end. Like also I was working from home, I was away from my team. There were a lot of different factors, but I can just like honestly say now that it's something that what I'm doing now and what I want to do after school is like I'm ready to like leap all in.
Yeah. I love that.
All right, Jen, what does the next 5 years hold for you, both professionally and personally?
5 years from now, I hope I'm building my own brand as the go-to consumer growth investor. I want to be that person that people want on their cap tables, want their support and advice, and I want to make a name for myself. On the personal side, I hope in 5 years I will have started a family. I'm getting married this summer, which I'm excited about. Cherie will be there.
I'm a bridesmaid. What do you mean I'll be there?
She'll be there.
I'll be standing up there with you, girl.
So I'm really excited to get married, and I want to like really build a home for myself in the Bay Area, have a family, and those are things I'm really looking forward to beyond career.
Those are big milestones.
Yeah. I mean, we're heading into our 30s.
Bro.
30s are the new 20s.
I was actually talking to my mom about this over winter break.
Yeah.
The fact that we're almost 30, but when she was at this point, she'd had already had a child.
Yeah.
Which is so crazy.
That is crazy. I cannot imagine having a child right now.
No, neither could I.
I can't take care of myself right now. So.
Yeah. Yeah,
I guess
it's a crazy thought.
When you were in like middle school or like just when you were a kid, what did you think you'd be doing, or like what stage of life would you have thought you were in right now versus reality?
I mean, you know this about me. Until recently, I never imagined myself having kids. Like, even as a kid, or like elementary, middle, high school, like I never thought about that for some reason. Like, I never pictured me having kids until this last summer.
I love that.
So, I don't know. What did I expect for myself? I think seeing my sister, who's quite a bit older, seeing the different stages of life that she was in was something that I could look up to and see her as a role model. So kind of seeing how she went to business school, I was like, oh, that could be interesting for me because I'm a few years behind her. But maybe since she hasn't reached that point in life of having kids yet, maybe I have never really imagined that. So who knows?
Could you have imagined yourself as a content creator, an entrepreneur, starting your own business? Or, like, what did you see? Like, if you did your vision boarding as a young person, what would be on that board?
I didn't know what I would do because I think I have been following and experimenting different interests of mine, but I knew that I wanted to be the best. Which is interesting.
Yeah.
I have a vision board. So Jen and I have put together like a vision board of what we want this next year to be. And I've done this since like 2015. Those vision boards from 2015 are in our garage.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I was going through my stuff and I found them. And I was actually going to take them out because I wrote on the back of my vision board like a little note to myself in 2015.
I love that.
And you will find, it's so interesting. I'll have to show you these vision boards because I would love to hear your thoughts of like comparing them from then, 2015, to like the ones that I did in 2024.
Yeah.
What you see the difference. I think there's just, if you're just looking at the vision boards, trend towards accomplishing or like getting and goals and all that, like just being the best. Yeah. So I didn't know if I was pre-med for a little bit. I was studied computer science, thought maybe software engineering. I didn't know where my path would lead me to, and definitely not as content creation. I could have never imagined that.
Yeah.
I think there were things that pointed me in that direction early on, but like I never thought this could be a thing. And I don't think it was a thing until like the last couple of years where people could make a living doing it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think just being the best.
I like it.
Yeah. What has been your favorite class at the Stanford GSB?
Ooh.
If you can only choose one.
I do have to say I really loved the strategic communication class. So this
Shout
is a
out.
class that Cherie and I took together where basically every class you're practicing giving a speech, giving a presentation in various forms. It's like you're leading a meeting and everyone's around like a little conference table, or you're giving like a 5 to 7 minute speech with no notes in front of you, with slides, with no slides. I just felt that was like so valuable to get feedback on how I present myself, how I speak, how I move my hands, how I pause, and like the intonations in my voice. Like there's so many things that go into someone's first impression of you, or like your brand or your reputation, that I just never thought about. Like coming out of college, I was always like, oh, if I do a good job, if I work hard, that's enough. But I think a big learning I've had from this class, and also just like the GSB in general, is there's so many different factors that go into, I guess, like success and showing up, asserting your power, and having confidence. And I just thought that class was valuable to think through those factors and think about how I want to show up in the world every day.
Shout out to Allison Kluger and Bert Alper. Oh, I love that.
Yeah. What about you?
Oh, you know what I'm going to say.
iJab?
Yeah. Literally, iJab, shout out Professor Keith Hennessy. Craziest / most exciting class with the most learnings. iJab stands for I'm Just a Bill, and it's a class that's a simulation of Congress for 10 weeks. You get a role, you have role guidance, you have objectives that you need to achieve. And I don't have any policy background, so I thought it would be a really challenging class in that regard. The policy background stuff, you learn. The thing that was most difficult about this class was the interpersonal relationships and how do you negotiate with a Republican senator from Arkansas when you're a Democratic senator from Washington State and you have differing objectives across these bills that we have to pass. What do you do and how do you handle them inside the classroom, outside the classroom? And these are your classmates. Some of them are playing hardball in the class, and some people are willing to give on other things. So it was really interesting. And that was one of the classes that pushed me the most to really run towards the fire, run towards conflict when I am not that type of person normally.
Well, I didn't take this class, but what I found really interesting was how committed everyone was to their roles. Like, the stuff I was hearing about this class and the conflict that people got into, like, how hard they, like, stood their ground, I was like, it's a class. But I guess what I'm curious about is, what do you think it was about that class that made everyone show up in that way, where they, like, took it seriously, really immersed themselves in their roles, and, like, made the class the way it was so you could push each other like that?
3 things. 1, Stanford MBA students are hardos. When they care about something, they are going to go all in. I don't think there's really any like middle ground. There's some people who didn't really care for the class or couldn't invest the time. They're not part of that bunch, but for the most part, I think MBA students, when they care, they care.
Yeah.
Second thing is that this simulation only works when people are invested in it. If people think the simulation is stupid or this is some dumb exercise, it doesn't matter, it all falls apart. So it really counted. There was like social accountability where people like relied on each other to be all in. And the third thing, our grades were dependent on it. So we had each objective and you were graded at the end of the class on how many objectives you achieved and how you went about achieving it.
It's really impressive actually, like how Keith Hennessy was able to like create the simulation and have everyone bought in.
Yeah.
I love that.
Keith Hennessy and the TA team, we had 3 amazing TAs that like spent, I think 40 hours a week is what they told me in the first few weeks, just putting everything together and, all the different intricacies of the role and who would be going head to head, who's the right personality to take on a leadership role, etc.
I have one more question for you.
Wait, I have another question for you.
Okay, I'm going first. So, when you think about your life so far...
Jeez, these are so deep, Jen.
What can I say? I'm highly reflective.
True.
When you think about your life so far, what do you think is... You get a choice. Either the biggest legacy you've had, or, I guess, the biggest accomplishment you're proud of.
I think about impact a lot. And it's actually one of the main things that drives me and what I want to do. So whether I'm working on my own content, whether I'm working at a big corporate company, tech company, what is the impact I'm having and who am I helping and serving? So I would say the legacy that I hope to leave is that through content and also through evergreen content, my content helps to educate, teach, and empower people around the world and helps them get access to information they otherwise wouldn't have known about. I remember being in college, like, for example, all the questions I asked you about finance, I'm like genuinely curious about.
And we're like best friends, and you haven't asked me those questions before.
It just doesn't come up. We talk about other things.
Which I kind of love that our conversations aren't career-based.
Wait, what am I? I'm like, what's this umbrella of private equity? No, like we talk about like a zillion other, like we talk about anything kind of but.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
Well, also we are in different swim lanes in terms
That's
of like
true.
what we do.
I honestly think though everything's an ecosystem. Like whatever you're doing, Like, for example, my question about like the biggest business or life lesson you've had as a creator, that's still useful and relevant to someone in a completely different space.
Sure.
You know?
Sure.
It's translatable.
It's true. But yeah, I think about impact. And so I hope the legacy that I leave is helping, I think, reach as many people as I can. So reach is really important to me. My vision is to empower like 100 million people to see what's possible in their careers that they probably wouldn't have known about otherwise. And I hope that people think of me as the number one influencer to go to for business and lifestyle advice, career advice. And so in that way, it's reach, it's 100 million people, which is a crazy number.
Yeah.
But I'm like, that's the vision.
You got this.
We got it.
Yeah.
But then I also think about like global reach as well. Like, who are the people that this information will help the most? Like in one of my DMs, which I read on Instagram, a woman messaged me and she's like, hey, I'm from a small village in India. I don't know anyone who's gotten an MBA in the US before. I watch your content on Instagram and now I learn more about what this is and it's something that I could be interested in. And so I think what am I doing and how am I doing it is really important. And that's the legacy that I hope to leave.
I love it.
Final question for you, Jen. What are you looking forward to in the remaining 5 months that we have here at the GSB?
I love the community that the GSB has created here. And I think in the next 5 months, it feels a lot like senior spring, where it's like, this is the last time that all of us will be together in the same space. We can learn from each other, reach out to anyone, and be able to just like get a coffee together tomorrow. So yeah, I'm excited to just soak up the last few months of the GSB and have no responsibilities, no schedule, and just enjoy the amazing and diverse group of people that we have here.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jen.
Of course, thank you for having me.
You nailed it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Cherie's Corner with Jen. Please like, comment, and subscribe. We'll see you next time. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Cherie's Corner with Jennifer Huang. Before we get to the main takeaways, please like, comment, and subscribe. It would also mean a lot to me if you could share this episode with someone who might find this content helpful. Alrighty, let's get to the takeaways. The first main takeaway from this episode with Jen is that breaking into finance is a very long path. Jen opened up about her journey of getting into finance, working in finance, and succeeding in the industry over the last 6 years. If you're interested in joining the finance industry, start prepping early, like even in college, and be thoughtful about which firms would be a good fit for you. The firm you join influences how you invest in companies and how you partner with them. Jen also talked about how finance is a pretty tough career in terms of the hours. What is the right balance in terms of sacrifice so you're still setting yourself up for success? The second big takeaway from this conversation is that I love Jen's breakdown of public versus private investing, investment banking, hedge funds, private equity, venture capital. These are all the terms that people are talking about in conversation, and it can get pretty confusing of how they all relate to one another. I loved her very clear breakdown of these complicated finance terms in this episode. Also, Jen talked about the real about the finance hours, the pay structure, and compensation of those working in finance. It was a great overview of how things are run. The third takeaway is that every experience that you have leads to something new. From working with a professor in Jen's freshman year of college, or even my experience of cleaning mouse cages every Friday morning my freshman year of college. You have to start somewhere, so try something new and figure out what you can learn from it. You might not know where those small things lead you to, but as long as you're connecting the dots, figuring out your next step, you definitely will learn from it, and hey, you never know where it can take you. Thank you again for tuning in to this episode of Cherie's Corner. I'll see you next time. Bye!